There are two economies. The one you participate in, where you trade hours for dollars, where you compete for jobs, where you're told that hard work and talent determine success. And then there's the other economy, the invisible one, where deals happen before they're announced, where opportunities are distributed through whispered conversations, where wealth doesn't trickle down, it circulates within closed loops that you're not part of. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's not about secret societies or shadowy cabals. It's about something far more powerful and far more mundane. Networks, the invisible architecture of relationships, access, and information that determines who gets opportunities and who doesn't, who gets funded and who gets ignored, who gets wealthy and who stays poor. And here's what makes this system so effective. It's almost completely invisible to the people outside it. If you're not in the network, you don't even know it exists. You just wonder why your equally talented competitor got the deal. Why someone with a mediocre idea raised millions while your superior product couldn't get a meeting. Why certain families stay wealthy generation after generation, while social mobility remains a statistical myth. This is the story of how networks, not merit, not hard work, not even intelligence, determine economic outcomes. And once you see the pattern, you'll understand why the game was rigged long before you started playing. Let's go back to medieval Europe, 13th century. Cities are growing, trade is expanding, craftsmen are producing goods, textiles, metalwork, leather, tools. In theory, anyone with skill could become a successful craftsman. In practice, access was tightly controlled. The guild system, if you wanted to work in a trade, you had to join the guild. And joining the guild wasn't about skill, it was about connections. You needed a master craftsman to take you as an apprentice. But masters only took apprentices from families they knew, sons of existing guild members, relatives, family, friends. If you were an outsider, no matter how talented, you couldn't get in. The guild would refuse to certify your work. They'd refuse to let you sell in the city market. They'd use legal and physical intimidation to shut down any competition. The guild controlled access to customers, access to raw materials, access to the market itself. And here's the mechanism that made it self-perpetuating. Master craftsmen had strong incentives to limit the number of new masters. More masters meant more competition, which meant lower prices and lower profits. So they made the apprenticeship system deliberately difficult. 7 years of unpaid labor, expensive masterwork requirements, arbitrary standards that could be used to reject candidates. The result? Craft occupations became hereditary. Blacksmith families produced blacksmiths for generations. Weaver families produced weavers. The skilled trades, the middle class of medieval society, became a closed network. Wealth circulated within families and guild connections. Outsiders, no matter how talented, were systematically excluded. This pattern would repeat for the next 700 years. The names would change. The mechanisms would evolve. But the fundamental structure, closed networks controlling access to economic opportunity, would remain constant. 15th century Florence, the Medici family rises to become the most powerful banking dynasty in Europe. How? Not by being the best bankers. Other families had equal financial skill. The Medici dominated because they understood something fundamental. Information is more valuable than money. The Medici didn't just lend money. They created an information network. They had agents in every major European city. These agents reported back constantly which nobles were struggling financially, which kings were planning wars, which merchants were expanding, which trade routes were opening, which currencies were stable, and which were about to collapse. This information gave the Medici an insurmountable advantage. They could offer loans before competitors even knew there was demand. They could shift capital between markets before price movements occurred. They could predict political outcomes and position themselves accordingly. But here's the critical part. They didn't share this information. The Medici network was closed. Information flowed up to the family, but rarely back out. Other bankers operated in relative darkness, making decisions based on local knowledge and public information. The Medici operated with a god's eye view of European finance. This information asymmetry created a self-reinforcing cycle. The Medici's superior information led to better investment returns. Better returns meant more capital. More capital meant they could fund more agents in more cities, generating even more information. The network effect compounded. Within 2 generations, the Medici had more wealth than most European kingdoms. Other banking families tried to compete, but breaking into the network was nearly impossible. The Medici had first-mover advantage on relationships with every major power center. They had marriage alliances with noble families across Europe. They had agents embedded in royal courts, commercial centers, and religious institutions. A newcomer couldn't replicate that network in a single lifetime. So wealth concentrated. The Medici, the Fuggers in Germany, the Rothschilds later. Banking became hereditary not because financial skill was genetic, but because the network was inherited. Your family connections determined whether you could participate in high-level finance. Everyone else was locked out. 17th century. Global trade is exploding. Ships are sailing to India, China, Southeast Asia, bringing back spices, silk, tea, exotic goods that Europeans will pay fortunes for. In theory, any merchant with a ship could participate. In practice, governments granted monopoly charters to exclusive trading companies. The British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company. These weren't just businesses. They were networks with state-enforced monopolies. If you weren't part of the company, you couldn't legally trade in those regions. If you tried, the company's private armies, yes. They had armies would seize your ships and cargo. To join the company, you needed to buy shares. But shares weren't sold on an open market. They were offered privately to existing shareholders. Two politically connected families, two nobles with royal favor. The network was closed before it even started operating, and the returns were extraordinary. Early investors in the Dutch East India Company saw returns of 3,600% over 20 years, not 36%, 3,600%. 1 guilder invested in 1602 was worth 36 guilders by 1622. Wealth on an unimaginable scale, but who got access to those investments? The network. Dutch merchants who already had capital, family connections to the company directors, political relationships with the Dutch government. If you were a talented but unconnected merchant, you couldn't participate. You could watch the network get wealthy while you scraped by on local trade. This pattern became the template for modern capitalism. Exclusive networks backed by state power, controlling access to the most profitable sectors of the economy. The names changed, joint stock companies became corporations, company directors became boards, but the structure remained identical. Fast forward to early 20th century America, the country is industrializing rapidly. New fortunes are being made. And the old elite, the Boston Brahmins, the New York old money families face a problem. How do you maintain control when wealth is being created by people outside your network? The solution, educational gatekeeping. The Ivy League universities Harvard, Yale, Princeton become finishing schools for the elite, but they're not just about education. They're about network creation, about ensuring that the next generation of powerful people all know each other, all share similar worldviews, all have obligations and connections to each other. Admission isn't based purely on merit. Legacy admissions give preference to children of alumni. Geographic preferences favor certain regions. Character evaluations allow subjective rejection of qualified candidates. The result is a student body drawn overwhelmingly from wealthy, connected families. And what happens after graduation? The network activates. Investment banks recruit almost exclusively from Ivy League schools. Top law firms do the same. Consulting firms? Fortune 500 executive positions. Venture capital partnerships? Not because Ivy graduates are smarter, studies show talent is distributed equally across universities, but because the network trusts its own. A Harvard graduate applying for a job at Goldman Sachs is evaluated by Harvard alumni, already at Goldman. A Yale law graduate interviewing at a white shoe law firm meets Yale partners. The network recognizes and rewards its members. Everyone else is outside at risk. By the 1950s, this system is fully operational. Sociologist C. Wright Mills documents it in The Power Elite. The same families cycling through Ivy League schools, elite law firms, major corporations, and government positions. Wealth and power circulating within a closed network that's practically invisible to outsiders. And here's what makes it so effective. It looks like meritocracy. Everyone at Harvard is smart. Everyone at Goldman is talented. But intelligence and talent are necessary conditions, not sufficient ones. The sufficient condition is network access, and that remains tightly controlled. Now we arrive at the present day, Silicon Valley, the startup economy. This is supposed to be the ultimate meritocracy. Anyone with a good idea and coding skills can build a company, attract investment, become a billionaire. The American dream digitized. Except that's not how it works. At all. Venture capital money that funds startups is controlled by a remarkably small network. About 400 people at roughly 100 firms make the vast majority of funding decisions for the entire startup ecosystem. And these people are not diverse. They're overwhelmingly white, male, Ivy League educated, and concentrated in San Francisco and Menlo Park. Getting a meeting with a top-tier VC firm requires network access. Cold emails don't work. Applications through websites don't work. You need a warm introduction from someone the VCs already know and trust. A previous founder they funded. A partner at another firm. Someone in the network. Studies show this clearly. Startups founded by people with elite network connections are 3 to 5 times more likely to receive funding than statistically identical startups founded by outsiders. Not because their ideas are better, not because their teams are more capable, because they have access. And once you're funded by a top-tier firm, they introduce you to other funded founders, to their limited partners who might become customers, to journalists who will write about you, to later-stage investors for your next round. The network opens, opportunities compound. Meanwhile, an equally talented founder, without network access, struggles to get even a first meeting. Their superior product doesn't matter if they can't get funded. Their better business model is irrelevant if they can't scale. They watch as network-connected founders with mediocre ideas raise tens of millions while their emails go unanswered. The data is stark. Less than 2% of venture capital goes to female founders. Less than 1% goes to black founders. The rest goes to the network people who look like, sound like, and went to school with the existing VCs. The system reproduces itself with extraordinary efficiency. At the very top of the economic pyramid sits a global network so exclusive that most people don't even realize it exists. The World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations. Exclusive conferences and organizations where political leaders, corporate CEOs, central bankers, and billionaires meet privately. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented, real organizations, and their power comes not from shadowy plots, but from simple network effects. When the people who control governments, corporations, banks, and media all know each other personally, all meet regularly, all share similar worldviews, outcomes become predictable. Deals happen at Davos that never reach public markets. Partnerships form at Bilderberg that shape global policy. When a central bank governor, a finance minister, and 3 bank CEOs are all in the same room having drinks, policy coordination happens informally. No vote required, no transparency needed. This network operates across borders. A CEO fired from a Fortune 500 company does UNT face unemployment, they immediately join the board of another major corporation, or become a senior advisor to a private equity firm, or get appointed to a government commission. The network takes care of its own. And access to this network is nearly impossible to achieve from outside. You can't apply to attend Davos, you need to be invited. You can't join the Council on Foreign Relations off the street, you need sponsorship from existing members. Even with enormous wealth, breaking into this network requires connections, introductions, and years of relationship building. This is why wealth inequality has exploded since the 1980s. It's not just that rich people are getting richer, it's that the networks controlling capital allocation have become increasingly closed and concentrated. The people making decisions about where money flows all know each other. They went to school together, they serve on boards together, they socialize together, and they fund each other's ventures. Here's the lie that makes the entire system function: meritocracy. The belief that talent and hard work determine success, that anyone can make it if they're good enough, that the people at the top earned their position through superior ability. This ideology is crucial, because if people believed success was determined by network access rather than merit, the system would lose legitimacy. Why work hard if opportunities are distributed through connections you don't have? Why develop skills if access is determined by family background and elite education? So the meritocracy story is reinforced constantly. Every successful person attributes their success to hard work and talent. They genuinely believe it. They do unseed the network effects that advantage them because those effects are invisible from inside the network. A Harvard graduate who gets hired at Goldman Sachs believes they earned it through intelligence and interviews. They don't see the thousands of equally intelligent candidates at state universities who never got an interview. A VC-backed founder believes they succeeded because their product was superior. They don't see the equally good products that failed because their founders couldn't access capital. The network is invisible to its members. They experience it as meritocracy because everyone around them is talented. What they don't see is the selection process that excluded everyone else before the competition even started. And here's the deeper paradox. Networks are actually efficient in some ways. Trust reduces transaction costs. Shared experience facilitates communication. Network hiring often works well because cultural fit and mutual understanding matter. The problem isn't that networks exist, it's that they're closed, that they systematically exclude talented people without access, that they concentrate opportunity among people who already have advantages. Today, in 2024, network effects dominate economic outcomes more than ever before. Consider how capital actually flows. Venture capital firms are funded by limited partners, wealthy individuals, and institutions. These LPs invest with specific VC firms because of relationships. A university endowment invests with Sequoia because they've known the partners for decades. A family office invests with Andreessen Horowitz because they're connected through previous deals. Those VC firms then invest in startups. But which startups? The ones introduced by trusted sources? A Stanford professor recommends a student's company? A previous successful founder introduces their friend? A Y Combinator partner makes a warm intro. The network provides deal flow. Those funded startups then hire employees. But from where? From the network. They post jobs. But their best hires come from referrals from existing employees, who recommend people they worked with previously, who come from similar backgrounds and schools. The network fills the company. When the startup exits acquired or goes public, the returns go back to the network. The VCs get their returns and invest in more startups introduced by the network. The founders become angel investors and fund their friends' companies. The early employees start their own companies and hire people they know. At every stage, capital and opportunity circulate within the network. And at every stage, people outside the network are systematically excluded, not through explicit discrimination, but through the simple friction of trust and access. This is why wealth inequality has reached levels not seen since the 1920s. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90% combined, not because they work 90 times harder, not because they're 90 times smarter, Because capital compounds within networks, and those networks are closed. And here's how the system maintains itself. Education has become the supposed path to network access. Want to break into elite circles? Get into an elite university? So millions of students take on massive debt pursuing degrees that promise network access, but the network doesn't actually open. Yes, a degree from Stanford or Harvard provides advantages, but those advantages are largely about demonstrating that you already had enough resources and connections to get admitted in the first place. The actual network access, the introductions to VCS, the referrals to top firms, the invitations to exclusive events requires something more. It requires coming from a family that's already connected. First-generation college students at Ivy League schools report feeling like outsiders. They're academically qualified, but they don't have the social capital their peers have. They don't know how to navigate recruiting. They don't have family friends who can make introductions. They don't understand the unwritten rules. Meanwhile, legacy admit students whose parents attended the same university have instant network access. They're invited to alumni events their parents attend. They get summer internships through family connections. They understand the system because they grew up in it. So education reproduces inequality rather than solving it. The students who need network access most are least likely to get it. The students who already have connections just get more. And for everyone else, the vast majority attending known elite schools, the promised economic mobility never materializes. They graduate with debt but without network access. They compete for jobs against equally qualified candidates, but lose to whoever has the better referral. They watch as less talented but better connected competitors advance past them. The meritocracy promise was always a myth. Education doesn't provide network access. Networks provide network access, and those networks are closed. We're approaching a breaking point. When economic mobility stalls, when people realize that hard work and talent don't determine outcomes, when the network effects become visible, social stability breaks down. History shows the pattern clearly. The French Revolution happened when the aristocracy's networks became too exclusive, too divorced from merit. The early 20th century progressive movement emerged when industrial monopolies and elite networks strangled competition. The 1960s social upheaval occurred when traditional gatekeepers faced challenges from excluded groups demanding access. Right now, we're seeing early warning signs. The rise of populist movements across the political spectrum, growing resentment toward elites, declining trust in institutions, younger generations reporting historically low faith that they'll achieve prosperity comparable to their parents. The network's response has been to tighten further. Elite universities are actually more selective than they were a generation ago. Venture capital is concentrating into fewer, larger funds. Wealth is consolidating at the very top. The networks are becoming smaller and more exclusive, even as they control larger shares of total economic resources. This can't last. Every historical example of extreme network closure and wealth concentration has ended in crisis. Sometimes the crisis is financial. The networks make increasingly risky bets with each other's money until something breaks. Sometimes the crisis is political excluded. Populations demand change through reform or revolution. Sometimes the crisis is social. The legitimacy of the entire system collapses. What's different now is the scale. The networks are global. Capital flows across borders instantly. Elite coordination happens at unprecedented speed and scope. When this system breaks, and it will break, because every system that concentrates wealth and opportunity eventually does, the consequences will be proportionally larger. Here's the fundamental pattern. Networks create efficiency. Trust reduces friction. Shared understanding facilitates coordination. So networks naturally form and provide genuine advantages to their members. But then networks close, because every member has an incentive to limit new entry. More members means more competition for limited opportunities. So admission becomes restricted. Gatekeeping intensifies. The network becomes hereditary. As closure increases, network advantages become less about efficiency and more about extraction. Less about coordination and more about monopoly. Less about merit and more about inheritance. The network begins capturing value rather than creating it. Eventually, the excluded majority realizes they're locked out, that the game is rigged, that their talent and effort don't matter because they don't have access, and they demand change. Sometimes change comes peacefully through regulation, through new institutions, through forced opening of closed networks. Sometimes it comes violently through revolution, through financial collapse, through system breakdown. But the pattern always repeats. Because networks are powerful, they create real advantages, so they form again. And then they close again, and the cycle continues. We're deep into the closure phase right now. The networks are tighter than they've been in a century. Wealth concentration is extreme. Social mobility is declining. Access is controlled by fewer people than ever before. The meritocracy story is becoming less believable. People can see the networks now, can see how opportunities are distributed, can see that talent and hard work are not sufficient, that you need access, and access is inherited, not earned. This is why your job applications disappear into black holes. Why your business idea can't get funding even though inferior competitors raise millions. why certain people seem to fail upward while you can't catch a break. It's not bad luck, it's not lack of talent, it's network access. You re-competing in an economy where the most valuable resource, access to opportunity, is distributed through invisible networks you not part of, where the game is rigged not through explicit conspiracy, but through the simple mechanism of people helping people they already know. The gold standard was a lie about money, meritocracy is a lie about opportunity, and the networks deciding who gets rich and who doesn't operate in plain sight, invisible only because we've been trained not to see them. Once you understand this, you can't unsee it. Every self-made billionaire who got $1 million loan from their parents, every genius founder who happened to go to Stanford and got introduced to VCS by a professor, every corporate executive who cycled through a predictable sequence of elite institutions, the networks are real, the closure is real, and the pattern is accelerating. If this changed how you see the economic system, subscribe for more hidden patterns. Because the people at the top don't want you to understand how the game actually works. They need you to believe in meritocracy, to keep trying, to blame yourself when their networks exclude you. But now you know. The secret networks aren't secret because they're hidden. They're secret because we've been convinced they don't exist.